She says this, as soon as he's weaned, right, I'm going to bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Ever watched a movie that's like, got you, right? It's got you, you're tracking with it, and it's like, man, this is captivating. And then somewhere, whether it be the middle or the end, there's this unexpected twist. But then you watch the movie again a second time, knowing that twist, and you're like, they were dropping hints everywhere. God's a storyteller. He may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. You know what Samuel's role is? Jesus now sits on the throne of this kingdom. I love this book, and it's got a lot to share with us. It's got a lot to tell us. This book is different than what we were doing with Ephesians, right? Ephesians is critical, and it's obviously doctrine heavy, and it's a critical book, but it's a book that's also standing on the Old Testament. It's a book that Paul would have had in mind when he was making his pronouncements. And so when we look at these books, we have to take bigger chunks, like in Samuel, we have to take these bigger chunks because we're talking now about narrative format, and it's a story. Now, in one sense, the whole Bible is a story, but this one is uniquely kind of in the genre of kind of historical narrative. And so I want to remind us each week now where we're at in the story, because the author means for you to understand this in a particular way. Right? So you don't get to kind of decide whatever you want to think of 1 Samuel, you think of it, and then I'll think of 1 Samuel. It's not how this works. We're trying to think the author's thoughts after him, right? So let's be reminded of where we're at in Samuel. Sorry, this thing, I'm having Zach's problem here. This thing's blowing my paper all over. Aaron, could you kill these fans? It's actually this one right here. Yeah, I appreciate it, man. All right, let's be reminded of where we're at in the story. Now, we just started Samuel this last week, right? So we just did the first 20 verses. And I want to bring us back into the narrative and remind us again of the story that's being told. The thesis of the book is critical to keep in front of us, which is why I put it up here on our graphic, right? Which is the bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble are bound on strength, right? They bind on strength. What does that mean? That means throughout the entire book, we're going to have example after example. There's going to be this thematic trajectory of weak shaming strong. God using weak things to give them his strength, and then what is perceived as mighty is going to be brought low, right? Now, we already started looking at that. We had two families in view this last round. We had Elkanah and his two wives, if you remember, and then we had Eli and his two sons. So let's take those just quickly, one at a time here. And we need to find out again who is considered the mighty and who is considered the weak. That's the point. Now, we had Peninnah and Hannah out of Elkanah's family. Peninnah, if you remember, she was strong in her own eyes, right? In the eyes of the world, she was very fertile in this example, and she knew it. She continually pushed that reality to everybody around her. She boasted in herself. She intentionally provokes Hannah because of Hannah's situation. And she, again, is fertile in her fertility. She is slandering. She is provoking. She's doing everything she can to make Hannah realize that she is superior, taking this superior status. And God despises that. That's what I don't think Peninnah, well, there's one of two options. Either Peninnah didn't realize this or she didn't care. But either way, God despises that, and God will break this supposedly mighty woman. And then you have the other example, Hannah, weak, right? In terms of the eyes of the world. She is at the mercy, and listen to this, of a God-caused closed womb. God caused it intentionally. It didn't just happen to her, God brought it to her. She's at the mercy of this thing. She cannot, remember, from the ancient Near Eastern mindset, she cannot live out her function as a woman. Her function, historically, in this case, as a woman, was to produce offspring. And she can't do it. And she is not only being perceived and shown as weak, she's now being ridiculed for her weakness. Something, again, that she is out of control of, but she's being ridiculed. And she is being ridiculed about the position that God has intentionally put her in. This is how the author is situating the story at the beginning. She's distraught. What does he tell us about Hannah? That she is continually crying, continually, to the point where she refuses to eat. She's in a bad spot, right? She's in a bad spot. But in her weakness, what does she do? Does she return to Peninnah, go back on the slander approach, go back to the provoking approach? Does she give it back? No. In her weakness, in all of this reality, she turns to God. And she cries out. And she cries out, and this text will tell us that the Lord remembers her. He hears her prayer. When the author here is presenting her in the opening lines of 1 Samuel, right? It's this position yourself as the mighty. If you follow Peninnah, if that's what you do, here's the point of, I think, these two women examples. Which one do you follow? If you position yourself like Peninnah, kind of this perception of mighty, God opposes you. I don't think Christians think like this. I don't think Christians have a concept, maybe a category, that God would ever oppose me. Because we think like, not only do we all have this kind of natural tendency to think that we're right? I mean, we all kind of have that idea. But we always have this idea that God would never oppose me. Now, I don't mean that in terms of salvation. Your salvation is secure in Christ if you're a follower of Jesus. But does God discipline his children? Yeah, in that sense, when we live in opposition to him, God will come against that. And I think these are in here for a real reason. But if you're like Hannah, humble, even in your weakness, God builds you up in his strength. That's the point that we're looking at with the first family. Then we go to Eli and his sons. Now, Eli, we encountered the first time we saw him in chapter 1. He was, and it says here, sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. Why is he sitting by the temple of the Lord, by the opening? Because that's what the high priest does. The high priest is supposed to guard the temple of the Lord. He does that physically, and he does that in one sense spiritually. And so what is Eli doing? He represents this entire priesthood of God and the entire spiritual state of Israel. And what is that? Wherever the priesthood goes, the people go. If the priesthood's corrupted, the people are corrupted. And what do we see? We aren't told very much in the first little bit that we've talked about, whether Eli is going to be listed amongst the mighty group or in the weak category. But we're given a glimpse. And what's the glimpse? Eli can't recognize worship when it's right in front of him. He doesn't recognize it. So that gives you this little moment to go, that's strange. And what we're going to show in the story, spoiler, is that Eli and the entire priesthood of Israel is corrupt before God. So they're in this position of might, but they're going to be brought low. The two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, we know next to nothing about them in the story except their names right now. But again, if we only had this part of the story, we would have there's this good bet that you could make that if wherever the father goes, the sons will be like him. The father's corrupt, the sons will be corrupt. It's interesting in the Bible, you find that often, that if the fathers are corrupt, the sons typically follow suit. But you rarely find that in reverse. In other words, if the fathers are righteous, you rarely find the sons being righteous, which is strange. What do you find often? Fathers are righteous, and the sons walk away from God. This happens all the time in the Scripture. It's a very strange phenomenon. It shows, again, of our real brokenness. But we're going to find out more, again, later about Eli and Hophni and Phinehas, especially his two sons. Where we left the narrative last week. Last week we left the narrative with with Hannah crying at the temple, right? Like we said, she's misunderstood by Eli as, her tears are misunderstood as drunkenness, and Hannah has to correct him. She corrects him, and he then steps into his priestly role and gives the blessing, right? And the blessing is said like this in verse 17, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." Hannah goes back home, right? And the text tells us that the Lord remembered her. She conceived and gave birth to a son, and she named him Samuel. And again, I wish we had time to go through the name because it's really, really cool. Talk to me afterwards. I know we talked about that. Talk to me afterwards because it's a really cool thing. It's more of a Wednesday night discussion than it is a Sunday morning discussion. But it's really a cool thing the fact that she named him that. And by the way, it doesn't say that she just named him Samuel. In verse 20, it actually says she named him Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. So she gave a quick little interpretation. And that's important from the Hebrew side. I could show you that in Hebrew. It kind of gets lost in English, but in Hebrew it comes out. And it's really kind of a cool thing. But okay, let's look today then at 21. We're going to just do the end of the chapter, which is 21 to 28. But I'm going to take it in chunks here. We're just going to do the first 3 verses. Let's start here. Now, again, follow along with me in your Bible, but I want to do it. I want to have a couple things I want to just point out to you here on the board, okay? 21 through 23 says this. The man Elkanah and all his house went up to offer to the Lord the yearly sacrifice and to pay his vow. But Hannah did not go up. For she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I will bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. Okay, let's just focus on this for just a second here. Here's what I think happens sometimes with the Bible, okay? Think with me for a minute here. Here's what I think happens. I think sometimes, and I'll just speak for me, sometimes we read these things and there's this perception that it's really, really fast, right? So we read the Bible and some people have even made the argument like, God doesn't operate today like he used to back then, because you read this text and it's like, bam, 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 things are happening all the time. Look at this, boom, she's praying for a son. She's got a son, he's doing this. And it's just like, it feels like it's just rocketing. But it's really not true. It's not true in history terms. If you think about this, let me give you a couple famous examples in the scriptures that would come to mind immediately and show you how it relates to this text. We can think of Moses. You can think of Moses, and what do we see? We see that Moses, through that cool, his mom puts him in the basket, right, grows up in Egypt. He gets saved miraculously, and then he lives in Egypt, until there's an incident where he kills an Egyptian man who was oppressing a Hebrew slave, and he kills him. And then his life is in danger from the Pharaoh, and he has to flee. Question, this is Bible trivia, how old was Moses when that Egyptian murder took place? Anybody? 40 years old. And then what happens in the Bible, this is Exodus 2 and 3, by the way, you turn the page, and a burning bush is talking to him. He's in Midian, right? He flees to Midian, and then he turned the page, a burning bush talking to him. Do you know how old he was when the burning bush happened? 80. You turn the page, and 40 years has gone by, right? So picture yourself. This is why I always tell my kids, 5 senses with the Bible, right? And by that I just mean get into the text as the best that you can through the eyes of these characters. What would it be if you're Moses and you're hanging out in Midian now, but it's only your 11th year there? Let's for easy math, let's say it's your 20th year there. Okay? Somebody says, how the heck did you get here? So like you have this cool backstory. Tell me your backstory. And what's that backstory? Well, hey, my mom, she did this crazy thing where she put me in a basket and saved my life because they were trying to kill everybody in Egypt, all these babies, and then I lived in Egypt my whole life. And then I came here because I had an incident that happened. So his backstory from that point on is just, hey, I grew up in Egypt. That's a cool story. Having no concept that 20 years in the future, he's going to go back to Egypt. And it's going to be a story that he could not fathom of what God's going to do. We do not think of Moses immediately now about the death of an Egyptian. We don't think about that. That would have been his backstory, the main key event in his life that kind of upended his life. No, we don't think about that. We think about him meeting with God, getting the 10 Commandments, face to face with God, wandering in the desert, all of these crazy things that Moses had no concept of. He's living life, and we turn a page, and his life's almost over. There's a perception that it's so quick. What about the other one? Abraham. It's a good one. Genesis 12, he gets the call. Hey, you're going to have a son. I'm going to make you into a great nation, right? I'm going to give you a son, this child of promise. He's 75 years old when that happens. You keep reading in Genesis, seems like life's just kind of clicking along. It's going to be 25 years before Isaac is born. God makes a promise. What about when you're in year 15? Did I misread this? What is happening here? Imagine that reality, but we can turn a page and just go, oh. What do we see here? We see the man Elkanah and all of his house went up to offer to the Lord yearly sacrifices and to pay his vow. What does that translate to? Hannah just had this crazy cool experience at the temple, which, by the way, God is absent yet in the sense of this text. God hasn't spoken to her yet. Not yet. She just prayed. She cried out to God. Eli comes in, does a priestly blessing. And it says in the course of time, she goes and has a baby. But where does the faith come in now? Now there's going to have to be a faith issue to say, is this God doing this? Or, does this just happen the way it normally happens? It's just now all of a sudden I got pregnant. There's going to be probably a temptation, like we all would have a temptation, to now assign that somewhere else. Like, oh, maybe that wasn't God, I'm not sure. She doesn't do that. What I think 21 shows us is that it is just the regular life now. We're back to the regular rhythms of worship life. They're going back to the temple, right? She's living her life. She's got a baby now. Now we're into normal life. But Hannah doesn't go to the sacrifice. That's interesting. Why not? Why doesn't this woman go commune with her God? If I'm you, right, and we're just reading this Bible right here, like I'm just in the house or whatever and I'm just reading, I'm at least going to ask that question, right? I might not know the answer. That's okay. But I at least want to go, why? For she said to her husband, as soon as the child is weaned, I'll bring him. Why don't you go to the temple and wean the child? Why does it have to be an either or? Why? What does that have to do with the story? Because we're in a narration here. I think what we see is Hannah is preparing her sacrifice. She doesn't go up to the temple to sacrifice. God is actually preparing her. He's going to magnify the lowly, right? This is the goal. He's going to magnify this weak woman, this former barren woman. He's going to magnify her through a deeper obedience. What's that obedience? She's preparing a sacrifice of her own. She's actually going to sacrifice her son for the nation of Israel. She's going to deliver him to the nation in that sense. Now, think about what this means, especially mothers in the room. I thought about you a lot this week when I was doing this message. I thought about Maddie, right? Just kind of a brand new mom. What this means, she knows that this day is coming. That means every cuddle, every laugh, every new first thing, first step, first word, first whatever, all the feedings, all those times that the baby falls asleep on your chest. They've got to be mixed. They've got to be mixed with joy and heartache. There's got to be a connection. If you knew that day, this 3-year day, right? And we think it's 3 years, and I'll tell you why in a second. But that weaning day is coming. My guess is the longer it goes on, the faster it's feeling like, oh my goodness, it's happening quick now. All of a sudden you blink and we're almost there. And you're going to deliver this kid. It's not like you're never going to see the child again. That child's not coming home with you. How does a mother deal with that? This is, I think, is what we're dealing with here. She is prepping. As soon as the child is weaned, I'll bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord. I think what she understood is this, and here's what I wrote in my notes. Motherhood, Hannah understood motherhood was stewardship, not ownership. And that's a principle. That's a principle for all of us, not just motherhood. But in general, I think this is in the narration of a mother. It's about stewardship, not ownership. How many things in your life right now do you feel like this is mine? What do you have right now? Me included. If I think about this, what do I have right now that has not been given to me? Name one. Everything you have, you're called as a manager. You don't own anything. I would even argue your life is not yours. You've been bought at a price. This is what Scripture tells us. Hannah understood that motherhood was stewardship, not ownership. But I want to show you something else that I think is interesting. Here's what's cool, okay? Here's what's cool. She's saying all these words, right? Okay, I'm going to do this, right? We're going to weaning. By the way, weaning, and I looked this up because I had to double check with ancient Near Eastern ideas, right? Weaning a child, at minimum we know is 2 years old, probably likely 3 years old, right? Even in ancient Near Eastern kind of thought. So what she's saying is, I got 3 years with this boy, and then he's into service. Again, not like she's never going to see him again, but it's a different reality now, okay? She says this, as soon as he's weaned, right, I'm going to bring him so that he may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. Okay, you ever watched a movie? You ever watched a movie that's like, got you, right? It's got you, you're tracking with it, and it's like, man, this is captivating. And it's got all the, you're kind of following the pattern of the character development, you're just loving the entire storyline, and then somewhere, whether it be the middle or the end, there's this unexpected twist. And you're like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. But then you watch the movie again a second time, knowing that twist, and you're like, oh, they were dropping hints everywhere. I didn't have the context for it then, but they were dropping hints everywhere. Movie that comes to mind immediately, spoiler alert, The Sixth Sense. Anybody seen this movie? The Sixth Sense. Now, it's a great movie. It's an old movie, by the way. It's weird to think, by the way, that movie is, 26 years old now, which blew my mind. I didn't realize it was 1999. I had to look that up, too. 1999. I was like, what in the world? How is that possible? This movie, this film, they kind of wrote this film, and it plays out as a supernatural thriller, right? There's this child psychologist who's working with this boy, and this boy, when his famous line is, I see dead people. And he is, through some really cool cinema and scary kind of scenes, he's working through this whole thing, and this child psychologist is working with him the whole time. And what's the spoiler? What's the twist? The child psychologist is dead the whole time, right? So you go there, and at the end, I remember the first time you watch it, you're like, no, this is impossible. That's not true. And then you go back and you watch it, and you're like, dude, they were dropping hints everywhere. I didn't have a context for it. You see it? God's a storyteller. How do we know how to tell stories like The Sixth Sense and really get those kind of moments? Because God did that. How did he do it? He may appear in the presence of the Lord and dwell there forever. You know what Samuel's role is in the kingdom? Not only is he going to transition the nation from the judges' time period into a monarchy, but there's going to be this one king. And that one king is going to get a promise. And it's going to be what? An eternal kingdom. In that sense, Samuel will dwell there forever, because the kingdom that he is going to, in one sense, be a real instrument in bringing about is going to have an eternal covenant that is still in place today. Jesus now sits on the throne of this kingdom, and it started right here. He's going to dwell there forever. And when you go back to the story, you go, man, he's dropping hints here. But if we didn't know that, right, this is not going to be until 2 Samuel. This is 2 Samuel 7. But you go back and look at this, you're like, oh, it's right there. God's unpacking these kinds of realities, right? He's showing these things. He's dropping hints. There will be an eternal covenant, and in that way, Samuel will dwell there forever. And then we even have Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word. What do you think that means? You see the thesis here? God is establishing the weak. God is doing it. Not a Peninnah-style mighty person, but we have a Hannah-oriented, weak person, former barren woman, who's now bringing a toddler, and this toddler is going to be established by God in his temple. It's not going to be through a king. It's not going to be through a warrior. It's going to be through a child. That's how this is going to happen. All right, let's continue. It says this in 24. Let me read it from the Bible here. 24 says this. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine. And she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. and the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. Okay. It's easy to read past things sometimes and think they're just kind of filler. Like they're just kind of like details that are just like, we're just kind of thickening out the story. Or we're just giving some details that are, just matter. And that's true in some sense, but there's also, I think, always multiple levels. There's multiple levels of things at play here. So the job of a good Bible student, which in one sense we should all be, is we're just paying attention to the text. Why are these words in there? Why did he say it this way? This is really important. Now, imagine this scene. And again, I would say especially mothers. It's true of all parents, but you moms, you have a different reality here, I think. Let me ask you this question. She weaned him, she took him up with her, along with these offerings, and they go to Shiloh. He's young, so we're going to say 3 years old, 2 to 3. Moms, how long does that walk feel? Each step. Get into her shoes for a minute. Each step. Yeah, and she knows she's not coming back with this kid. Each step is going to cost her. And she's giving this child in service to the Lord. How long does that feel? Because this is the moment of fulfillment. She's lived with this boy. She prays to God. God answers. She's now made a vow, and this is now the moment of fulfillment. This is the time to make good on her promise. And now you're walking to Shiloh. This is the day you probably dreaded. I don't know. We have something similar maybe when our kids move out or something. Some kind of hard transition time. Sometimes marriage is that way, where it's like, you're not little anymore. You're not my kiddo. Something has changed. It's that moment. I don't think it's by accident that it says a 3-year-old bull. I think there's a connection there with age. I think that's an important thing. There's been some debate as other things that we won't go into, but I think we'll stick with the 3-year-old bull and why I think that's a direct connection to Samuel. But here's the thing. She's not offering just the bull. She's offering her boy. Do you see the sacrifice side here? This is a big deal. It's a big deal. This isn't payment, though. This isn't payment for what God did for her. This is worship, right? This is worship that's going to cost Hannah everything. And then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. Now again, story time issues, right? Kind of a movie angle. If you knew the rest of the story, if Eli did especially, this is not a good day for him. They're delivering the child that's going to undo his household. And they bring him to Eli. Does he deserve it? Of course he does. He's unfaithful. He's made a mockery of God's law, of God's rules. But this young boy, the perceived weak one, is going to break down the mighty. This is what we're doing. We're living out the thesis right here. They bring him to Eli. There's tension in the story here. It's easier to see on the second watch, right? Just like the movie. Let's look at these last verses. It says this in 26. Let's read to the end of the chapter here. And she said, "Oh, my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who is standing here in your presence praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore, I've lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." Okay. This is the unveiling moment. Again, imagine, moms, you're walking to Shiloh, you know what's about to happen, and now you have this unveiling moment before the same high priest. And do you notice what? Do you notice right away that Hannah actually has to tell the story? Which indicates to us what? That there's been some time that's gone by. Hey, remember that thing that happened a couple years back? You might remember me. Apparently it was enough to remember. I don't know what that says in terms of how often or how crazy the scene was, but she references it. I'm that woman, by the way, that was standing here a couple years back. This is the boy. This is the one that we were praying about. He's here. This child I prayed, the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. And then it says this, therefore I have lent him, right? By the way, the literal translation would be given him over to the Lord, okay? To the Lord, as long as he lives, he's given over to the Lord. And he worshiped there. Now, this is dripping with covenant imagery. You see the covenant reality here, right? Hannah is fulfilling her vow, and the boy worships. She's not the only one worshiping. The boy's worshiping too. Samuel, even as a toddler, the Lord is raising up as this weak one to undo what has been happening in his temple. And what's been happening in his temple? No worship. So it begins with worship. These weak ones are being brought up to worship. Here's what I want to show you. I think the entire chapter, as we close out even chapter 1 in this first establishing setting, right? Every movie has a setting that you start in. If you establish the setting, this has been a story about reversals, right? This isn't a story only about unanswered prayer. This is about divine reversals that are taking place right here. There's a barren woman and there's a toddler, and God is breaking the bows of the mighty. God's story always advances like that. God loves to shame the strong with the weak. He always does it this way. Why would he do it that way? Why? Glory. God does everything to give himself the highest amount of glory. If you never remember anything we ever talk about, every kind of doctrine we've ever discussed, any message we've ever said up here, if you remember nothing, always remember that everything God does is for his own glory, to give himself glory. That is the supreme value in the universe, God's glory. That means everything that's ever happened in your life serves to give God glory. And people, I think understandably at some level, would say, tell me how my mom getting cancer gives God glory. And what do you say to that? I'm not sure. We're not told all these things. How does a young boy dying give God glory? I'm not sure. I'm not told those things. Neither are you. But we do know this. God gives himself glory. He's established that. The level of revelation he wants to give about that is up to him. But it doesn't change the reality that God, everything God does, gives himself the highest amount of glory because it's right for him to do so. That's not him being a megalomaniac. That's him saying, there's nothing you could point to beyond me that's more glorious. Therefore, my glory is the supreme value. And that's how the universe operates. And I'll tell you, Christians in the room especially, that stands to give you comfort. Because nothing then in your life is meaningless. Name the situation. I don't care the level of pain. I don't care the level of absolute heartache or tragedy. It's not meaningless. There's nothing chaotic about your life. We feel like it. But from God's angle, everything is sovereignty. Everything is designed to give him glory. And he has positioned us, all these lives in here in individually different ways, he's assigned us unique roles and unique circumstances to give him glory with. Are you giving God glory with the circumstances that you're in? That's a great question. That's a great internal, let's do some work on ourselves type of question. How are you in your life with giving God glory? I want to close our talk and our thought on this chapter 1, with this thought as it relates to, again, these kind of families that have been unpacked here, right? The story's going to get much deeper as we go on. The story's going to take on a few more characters. We're going to get a lot more intrigue, a lot more issues, a lot more kind of working parts to kind of navigate through. But as we think of just chapter 1, here's what I think we see. We could take it a couple ways, but I'm going to take it this way. I think obedience is costly. Obedience to God is costly. Now, Hannah prayed when it hurt. But listen, and I want to tell you this, and this is not something that you don't understand. That's when it's easiest to pray. Right? It's easiest to pray when your life is in shambles. It's easiest to pray when you feel like you're at the end of your rope. That's when it's easy to pray. Hannah was praying during that time. But it didn't stop there. When her anguish was gone, when God responded, gave her a child, when life is back to normal, she obeyed. And it cost her the most precious thing that she had. Could she have gone back and said, well, I made that vow, but no, I'm not. Then you might try to justify it, like, well, I'm not even positive that God did this, so maybe this is just, by the natural course of just, getting pregnant and da-da-da. We love to justify these things. We love to. I'm in talks all the time during the week with people, and I'm pleading with them to not justify their sin. It is the constant role that I think men of God especially have to deal with, which is you're pleading with people all the time to not justify their sin. But we love to, and I love to too. Don't act like that I'm pardoned from this. I love to. And I need people around me that say, knock it off. We all need that. Obedience is costly. Hannah's showing that, but listen, true worship is not receiving from God. Receiving blessings from God. The world receives blessings from God. They woke up this morning. That's a blessing from God. The rain in Lebanon fell on the wicked in this city. That's a blessing from God. That's not worship. What is worship? When you give back to God what He's given you. Now we're worshiping. Here's what I don't get. I don't get why in Christian circles, church circles especially, it is seen as controversial to talk about giving. Tithing, offering money. People get weird. Why? Why would that be controversial, or sometimes even people would think offensive? Why? I'll tell you why. Because it's convicting. That's why. Giving is a direct indicator of what you worship. You want to see what you really worship? Check where your money goes. That's true. Jesus said these exact same things. That kind of worship and giving, as an example, giving back to the Lord what He's given you, it shows what you really value. It does. You will never know if God is trustworthy, God is faithful. You will never know. Not only will you be sinning, and hear me on this, I have no apology for this at all. If you are not giving back what God has given to you, you are in sin. That's just the end of it. But I will say this, that part aside, that category aside, you will never know. A byproduct of sinning in that way is that you will never know that God is trustworthy until you trust Him when it costs you something. That's true in your life in general. It's true in your giving. It's true in your evangelism. It's true in everything. It's true when you have to stand up for the truth when it's awkward to do so. It's true when you don't want to be that only person in the room that has to make a defense. It's true of all these things. You will never know God and His faithfulness until it costs you something. I want to close with this thought here. Today, let's talk about us, right? It's easy to talk about other people, let's talk about these other things, but today, may we, as a people, not just ask God for blessings, but we trust Him enough to give back what He's given to us. That obedience, it might cost us absolutely everything. Like Hannah, might cost you everything. But it will never be wasted in the hands of a sovereign God. Nothing you could give to God, and I'm not just talking about money, nothing you could ever give to God, do for God, as the sovereign of this universe, would ever be wasted when you do it in worship. We have competing idols in our life, you know. We do, I do, you do. We have things that want to take ownership of God's rightful spot. Where are you at with that? Are there idols in your life that you need to be killed? Are you, like Hannah, willing to give your most precious thing? Jesus picked up on this kind of language, right? If you don't hate your father, your mother, your brother, even your own life, you have no part of me. That's what Jesus said. Like, what do you do with that? That means he's the supreme value. There's nothing you have that's more valuable. This is, I think, what we see with Hannah. It's these glimpses, it's these shadows, these foreshadowings of what's to come and the standard of when God's Son is going to be given and sacrificed. So may we be a people that give everything. There's no cost that's too great when it's God's glory on the line.